Christians always had to ask themselves, does our faith accord with reason? How much of our faith accords with reason? And this is something that interested Christians for millennia. Christianity began in a context where people would ask reason-based questions about the divine. The word theology was invented by Aristotle about 400 BC. Christianity didn't come on the scene until more than 3 centuries later. So the idea that if you have faith, you don't need to give a reasoned account of what you believe in is called pietism. Pietism is a minority position in almost all religions. And the basic argument, like Peter Kraft can give, you believe in God, you believe that God gave you reason, you believe that reason is the greatest gift maybe that God gave you even. Why do you think God didn't intend you to use reason about the most important things in the world? People need to hear the other side of the coin. They need reasoned arguments for believing at least some of the things that Christians believe, for example, because Christians do believe in persons. Persons are very, very important to Christianity. So if there is a reason to believe in the reality of persons that's independent of Christianity, it can be very helpful to Christians who want to defend their faith, first of all, from themselves, from their own loss of faith. And second of all, to defend their faith from attack from outside, by people who claim that other than faith, there is no reason to believe in persons, for example. But there are other reasons. One of the things that Roger Scruton does very well is he actually offers very deep analyses of all kinds of moral questions that the old categories weren't as good with. For example, his analysis of sexual desire, I think, is deeper than most of the Christian approaches to the topic that I know of, because most of the Christian approaches will make the argument that sexual virtue is a matter of natural law, for example. That we are designed by nature to be married and to procreate, and that's why we should have sexual virtue. And I think that's a limited argument. There's all kinds of problems with that argument. Like, for example, suppose that a woman reaches menopause and she can't conceive anymore. So is it perverted for a husband to make love to her at that point? There's also, the issue of homosexual sexual desire. So according to the natural law theory, there is no such thing as virtuous homosexual sex. But I think even if you're a Christian and you think that God forbids homosexuality, I think you can still see the difference. You can see that not all kinds of homosexual sex are equal. For example, you have homosexual pedophiles like the homosexual priests, in the Catholic Church scandal. And you could have a pair of consenting adults who have a lifelong loving relationship with each other. There is a difference here. Obviously, the second relationship is more virtuous. And so you need a theory that can give an account of that fact. And the old natural law theories, I don't think, really work for that. And they also don't really work because they don't give us really, I don't think, the answer to the question, why should I? What's in it for me? Why it's actually better for me? Yeah, so there is a kind of natural law that designed me to operate a certain way. But the whole point of evolution is that evolution tells us, yeah, nature designed us to work a certain way, but it didn't have our good as persons in mind when it did that. Our good as person doesn't come from physical nature. And I think it's becoming increasingly hard for people these days to believe that our good as persons comes from physical nature, because we can see how terrible nature is. And actually, people always knew that. It's called the problem of theodicy, the problem of why is there evil in the world. Well, some evil in the world comes from people being evil, but some evil comes from the fact that nature is extremely cruel to us. It kills us and it torments us and it does all kinds of awful things to us. So there is a very deep question of why should I, given all that we know these days about natural selection, do I really want to base my morality on these claims that nature actually has our best interests in heart, and not just as best interest as animals, but our best interest as persons, as rational beings? This seems to me very difficult to justify, and you can actually see, like, for example, I was reading the other day a book about the consolation of tribulation, I think it's called, by Thomas More. Thomas More was a very famous Catholic saint who was beheaded by Henry VIII because Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife and actually in the end declared independence from the Catholic Church, and he turned England into a Protestant nation. Anyway, Thomas More was a very high-ranking official. He was chancellor. And he didn't support this, and Henry VIII basically murdered him. And while he was sitting in prison awaiting execution, he wrote this book about how we can find comfort in adversity. And what's very clear is that a lot of what he says in that book is comfort in the end is knowing that whatever bad happens to us here will be rewarded in the next life. And I think a lot of the Christian answers come down to that. They come down to it's going to be good for me here, but I'm going to be rewarded for it later. And of course that creates other problems. That's not the end of theodicy, because doesn't that make heaven a kind of bribe for doing the right thing? That's one problem with it. The other problem with it is that it raises all kinds of questions about why is the world built like this. It sounds kind of artificial, you know. The basic story they'll tell you about theodicy is that God wanted to create the best possible world, and to create the best possible world he had to put free will in it. And in order to put free will in it, he had to put real consequences into it. And real consequences means you have to go to heaven or hell forever. Otherwise, you're not really free. If everybody ends up in heaven in the end, then you're not really free, are you? It's not really a choice that you're making. And so God is good because he created hell, in a sense. Hell is an expression of his goodness. The problem with this theory is that, you know, if I believed in some kind of horrible, evil, satanic religion, like those invented by the horror novelist H.P. Lovecraft, where there are gods, but they are evil, then you could make the same argument in the opposite direction. You could say, well, Satan, who is the ruler of the world, or, you know, Great Cthulhu, or Yog-Sothoth, or Shub-Niggurath, whoever it is, your evil satanic deity, wanted to create the worst possible world. So how do you create the worst possible world? Well, you create a world where people are constantly on trial to see if they show moral virtue or not, to see if they are able to resist the temptation to be evil. And you hold out this promise that people who are able to be good in despite of all this evil will be rewarded in the next life. And then they arrive at the next life and you punish everyone. You send everyone to hell, but the better they were on earth, the worse their punishment, their eternal punishment in hell. Well, isn't that the worst possible world? So the existence of hell can prove that God is good. It can also prove that Great Cthulhu is really bad. And both of these would work as a theory of why there is evil. And the response to this, there is a response to this that has to do with the ontological nature of good versus bad, and good versus evil. And evil is not actually a thing, it's the absence of good. Sure, great, but you can also say, why not say the opposite? Good is just the absence of evil, it's not really a thing. And like, you can argue about these things forever. And I'm not saying that the Christians are, you know, don't have a strong conceptual scheme holding their religion together. They have plenty of things they can say in response to any of these questions. But the point is, if that were enough, then we'd have more Christians. I think it's not enough for everyone, and I don't think it's enough for many people who consider themselves Christians. I think lots of Christians have difficulty with these things. And I think if you look at it like that, then any argument that gives you reasons to do things that you hope are good, any argument that can guide you in life on how to be happy, is useful. You know, they say that all truth is God's truth, the Christians say. And I would say, yeah, you know, I'm not specifically a Christian, but I also think that all truth is God's truth. Maybe the only God that exists for me is truth. But I don't think that whether or not you believe in God should change the question of whether you should pursue truth. I think we all should pursue truth by whatever means are available to us. And I think Roger Scruton touches on truths when he talks about things like sexual desire. He touches on truths that he arrives at through reason, not through faith, and I think are very enlightening and very helpful and very hopeful. And I don't think they exist in any scriptures that I've ever read. Like what he says about, for example, that sexual desire, when it is virtuous, it heals a certain kind of wound that we have, which is the wound that comes from being an animal that thinks of itself as a self. Because sexual desire is the only common experience in most people's lives where they are desired as bodies or as embodied persons. And to him, that's a very important spiritual benefit of sexual desire. But it can only come when you're desired as an embodied person and not as a body, which means that you have to get rid of the Tinder, and all of that. I haven't seen any kind of religious teaching that touched that point. It's a very sensitive point, and I think very profound.